call this meeting to order at 9 o'clock here. I'm Rob Rotter, Chairman, Iowa County Sheriff, also representing Iowa Sheriffs and Deputies Association. We'll introduce everybody else, starting down there with George, and then Rob has volunteered to go out to the crowd and let everyone introduce themselves out there.
George Griffith, Iowa Peace Officers Association.
Wayne Johnson, CenturyLink, representing large telco.
Blake DeRucci, Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management 911 Program Manager.
Judy Forrest, Blackhawk County, representing NAFCO.
Jeff Anderson, Marion County Emergency Management, representing the Iowa Emergency Management Association.
Mark Murphy, Dubuque County 911, representing the Iowa Firefighters Association.
Lawrence Harpence, representing IJIC.
Rob Dennett, the City of West Des Moines, representing the Iowa EMS Association.
Jack D'Angelo, Sully Telephone, representing small telcos.
Kirk Hundred-Mark, representing the Iowa Chapter of National Emergency Numbers Association.
Can you hear me?
Chris Jones, Area Sales Leader at Zetron.
Paul Guest, Director of Business Development, Zetron.
I'm Stacy Wood, Project Manager at Zetron.
Dwayne Voss with Raycom.
Jim Lundstedt, Homeland Security.
Brian Flynn, Motorola.
Dave Hanson, Calhoun County 901.
Terry McClanahan, Dallas County Sheriff's Office.
Curtis Pione, Polk County Sheriff's Office.
Robbie Johannesson, Iowa Department of Public Safety.
Chris Myers on the SWIC.
Brian Madewell, Westcom.
Mike Lauer, ICN.
Tammy Rodriguez, ICN.
Jeff Edwards, Des Moines Police Department.
Joel Martin, Iowa Utility Board.
Gary Johansson, CenturyLink.
John Drury, CenturyLink.
Mike Myers, CenturyLink.
Robert Bokinski, Pella Police Department.
Marcia Slycord, Pella Police Department.
Diane Seifert, South Central Iowa.
I'm just with her. Hannah Akers.
Pardon me.
Sherry Schmitz with Motorola.
Back to you up front.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anybody on the phone?
Brenda Vandervoort, Fayette County 911. Brenda Vandervoort, Fayette County 911.
Joe McCarville, Cedar Rapids Police Department.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Could I please have a motion to approve today's agenda? So moved. So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. And likewise for July 12th, 2018 minutes. I have a motion. A second? All those in favor? Against? Motion carries. Blake.
Good morning. I'm going to go over the quarterly financial reports. This is the quarter from April through June 1st. And for those either watching live or that don't have enough of the handouts that should be going around, I have the information on the screen as well. So we received approximately 7.4 in surcharge revenue, 1.3 in program expenses. That means the 60% of payments down to the PSAP was about 4.4 million. And the remainder was passed to the operating surplus at about 1.4. Also, if you remember some of the discussion over the last month, the full 6.9 million was dispersed equally through to the PSAPs, and that came out to about $61,000 per PSAP. You at the local service board should have received that at this point. And then just what remains in the operating surplus after that is the 12.5 million. And when you take into effect the catastrophic reserve, what's available is $9 million. Also, just as a reminder, that is what we are using for the startup costs for the network merging and the shared services. And again, an additional reminder at the end of fiscal year 19, so June 2019, whatever remains out of that will get passed through equally to the PSAPs as well, just like we did in July of the current calendar year. Any questions on the financials? Additional program manager report. At this point, 16 PSAPs have provided their notice of interest for the shared services. That's an additional 3 from last month. And you can kind of see how that breaks down with what other functionality and services PSAPs are interested in. We had a position posted. Basically, that was going to replace Samantha, who went to Utah about a year ago. There's going to be the 911 program planner and mass alerting position. We decided at this time not to hire that. We had not a lot of interest in the position, so we wanted to kind of cast a bit of a wider net and see if we could get a little bit more interest in the position before we went ahead and hired that. So probably another month, 2 months, we'll post that again. Just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of it. It seemed like it was about a week into it before I sent the notice out, and they closed after about 2 weeks total. So again, not a whole lot of, I think we only had 5 or 6 applicants, and we just wanted a wider net on that. An additional reminder, I had this up there last week as well. Lori's been gone from Comtech now for a couple months. We do have a new project manager from Comtech. That's Rod Robinson. You can see his email address and phone number there. That's kind of your entrance into any questions that you might have over network. You can certainly always call me, but my first stop is normally with Rod or with the Comtech NOC. I can't get in and look to see why your calls are rolling over or anything like that. So just a reminder that if you do experience anything like that, by all means CC me, but the Comtech NOC is probably your first stop. The 911 Fee Integrity Act. There's some emails going around about that. I believe I sent it out earlier, late July. Federal legislation has been introduced to try to curtail 911 diversions. If you remember, we were on that list a couple years ago, I should say, but there are some habitual offenders in other states. So this is an effort to try to mitigate that. There's been a lot of saber rattling from the FCC regarding this issue. And a lot of what some of the FCC, specifically one of the commissioners, has proposed did not show up in this federal legislation. That particular commissioner was talking about federalizing 911 funds if fees were diverted. It was talking about telcos being able to provide information to their customers about diversions or making it illegal to provide, to collect surcharge. None of that made it into this particular act. Really what this act does is asks the FCC to fully define their definition of allowable uses for 911 surcharge. Right now, the FCC kind of looks at what I submit as data and how we're using 911 and makes a determination based on to declare if it's been a diversion or not. So this act basically tells them to fully define what's allowable, what's not allowable. So it's a much stripped down version of some of the saber rattling that the FCC has been doing over this issue. So any questions on that? Somebody offline or over email asked, is this good or bad? It probably depends on what the FCC would ultimately come up with should it pass to make that determination. And then the last bullet there on federal 911 grants, we're hopefully in the home stretch of all the upfront paperwork and federal bureaucracy that's required to be able to make application on the federal 911 grants. The shared services or network migration is a perfect project for the federal 911 grants that are coming down. State applicants as well as tribes are the only authorized applicant for that. So we would be making application on behalf of the state to basically offset some of those costs that I talked about earlier for the startup of the network migration and the shared services. So if you remember, I think in 2011, 2012, the state did receive a federal 911 grant. I think at the time it was the tune of $1.3 million or so. So it's basically the same type of grant. It's just been it's still from the Spectrum sell-off. So that should be coming available soon. And hopefully we would be a suitable applicant for that. Any questions on the grant program? Yeah.
So what would be the criteria to get the grant then?
Basically, you have to be a state. You have to look at a next-gen type of project, and you can't be on the FCC diversion list. And you have to certify that you'll remain off of the FCC diversion list for the duration of the grant. GIS grants, if you remember, we kind of tweaked the way we're doing that, so we won't be approving those as a council going forward, at least for this year. We did hold a webinar on July 19th. It was attended by about 50 people. I think it was very well received. That link is up on our website. If you missed it, I would encourage you to watch it. It answers a lot of the questions about, if you are seeing match errors, what to do to correct a particular error. So I, again, encourage you to watch that. The first month has come and gone. 6 counties met all the criteria, met the benchmarks, so we processed their payments for this period, this first 6 months. There's many others that are, your data is good to go, you just need to re-upload it. Now that we're in fiscal year 19, just re-upload it. Part of what we're doing with this process is trying to encourage you to get in a rhythm or a cycle where you do upload that information regularly. So if you did it in June or May, great. We want it again now that we're past, now that we're into the start of the fiscal year. And then again, just a couple questions that came in. Just because you didn't get it the first month, you're still eligible for the $6,000 all the way up until December 31st. So, and that's just for period 1, basically through the end of the calendar year. Everyone is still then eligible for the $6,000 in the second half of the year as well. Just a snapshot on the current travel, public education, and training fund, where there was quite a bit of discussion about this last month. Last month, we formally approved $57,500. There's $18,000 on the table for discussion today. I went back and did review the specific motion and what was passed a couple years ago with APCO and NENA. Basically, it's $5,000 per organization per conference. So I believe APCO went ahead and requested slightly over that. So when you look at the number of conferences left, and APCO and NENA, they both have to do it in the spring as well. I listed it as encumbered, $14,500, which basically means there's $10,000 remaining that needs to cover council travel and anything else, public education, any training, all the way until June 30th. So that moratorium is in place until January. When we get close to January, we might want to take a look to see if any of those invoices came in under budget, because there's not a whole lot of money there for additional training requests is what I guess I'm going to say. Just to remind everyone, it's on the agenda, but the $18,000 advanced supervisor training is the only training that we have to consider today. I'm going to have Chris from Chris the SWIC come up and kind of cover this part together. Again, there was a lot of discussion on this last month. Just try to update everyone on where we're at with the ISICS consulates. We did write the $450,000 Homeland Security Grant Program investment justification to help fund those consulates. As you can see, DPS is the subgrantee, but we Homeland Security Emergency Management, maintains that oversight. The ISICS board and some of their committees are going to be really fostering that process of the procurement, who gets what, how you get it, how do you raise your hand and say, I want this. And I guess that's what I want kind of Chris to address, just so you're hearing it for those that aren't going to stick around for the interop meeting, so you get the same message.
Yeah. So we've looked at this from a lot of different views as far as what we could do with that type of monies, and it's actually been discussed in the operations committee, and the consensus there was that We do want to stretch this as far as we can to try to get these into as many PSAPs as possible. There's been a lot of algebra done on the side as well to figure out who would have access now, most likely, and then kind of take the worst case scenario on who would not. And we've kind of come up with a magic number and figured out how many PSAPs would be covered under this $450,000. And we're trying to figure out a way to also stipend some of the installation. Everybody's desires with that installation would probably vary significantly. We can't cover all of it, but we could cover a part of it. So we're trying to stretch this as far as we can. Those 26 consulates from MODA come from the ISSI credit. So in all, I think we have enough to stretch it so that we can get one into a PSAP that doesn't already have access or is not slated to have access, but we're still working on some of the logistics with that. In order to do this effectively, we do have to send out kind of a information gathering survey to figure out who has what and kind of what your plans are. There's a letter for that up before the board today to officially approve and then send out. That's going to have a survey built into it that you can go to and answer a few questions, and then it will automatically write to a Google Sheets document that we'll have access to, and we'll be able to start tallying things up from there. So at the high level view, that's kind of where we are.
That is a 3-year grant program, so I'm not saying it's going to last all 3 years. The money might be gone before then, or everyone might have access before then, but if you're not ready today, in theory, that money should be available for 3 years. Again, we're not going to ramrod it into your PSAP if you're not quite ready for it.
And in order to help facilitate the distribution of funds, if there's any requirements with grants saying that, well, hey, how do we know that they're going to be granted access? It's probably coming within the next month or so from the user group committee and a blanket approval for PSAPs and communication centers to access the network as a level 1 user for interoperability. That way, if it ever comes down to questions being asked with the grant monies, you can say, well, we're already approved to access the system. Now we're just buying the equipment.
Any questions on consulates?
Is it just for the consulates, or if there's a PSAP that has another way to connect?
We could certainly look at that. There's a lot of different ways to do this. A lot of different councils have different pathways to tie audio together. It may be a situation where a communication center or PSAP already has, say, a gateway that's just sitting there. Well, that kind of changes what you need a little bit. So.
And I wrote the grant really vague for that reason, basically just talking about achieving the capability of connecting, not specifying any sort of equipment.
Yep. And one thing to keep in mind too is that the type of equipment you buy and how you incorporate it into your center is going to dictate a lot on the functionality you have. So there's some concerns with that as well that will probably need to be discussed at some level to try to make sure that people are aware of what they're doing. So.
All right. And then any other questions for me?
Chris, you might as well just stay
No.
right. Oh, well, I'm just
Yeah.
saying he'll be next, so.
And then I wanted to provide an update, a kind of a detailed update on the shared services aspect of the virtual consolidation. Next month, we'll talk about the network migration. So I know there might be questions about that and the timing. Try to hold off until next month, and ICN will give a similar type of presentation. But I do have some folks in the room from Zetron, and they will kind of cover where we're at on the shared services. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Thank you. Good morning again. My name is Paul Guest with Zetron. This is, moving around, Stacy Wood and Chris Jones. So just want to start off with introductions on who we are and what our roles are. Stacy is the project and program manager for the shared services implementation in the state. So any questions on when are my shared services coming up, what's the process, what are the next steps, what do I need to do, should go to Stacy. Chris is the area sales manager, so any questions from anyone on what does it do, can it do this, can I do that, should go to Chris. And any other questions that you may have that do not fall into one of those two camps can come to me. I'm Blake's one throat to choke, so anything that he needs, he comes to me and I make sure that it gets addressed. I'd like to start off maybe at a 100,000-foot view, and then I'm going to pass it over to Stacy to get into the tall grass and maybe into the weeds of where we are from a status perspective. So the main agreement has been executed with the state. That occurred in late June. We've been ramping up the project from an equipment ordering and lining up the subcontractors that are going to be fulfilling the services. And we've been getting the notice of intake forms and interest forms from the 16 PSAPs that have indicated their interest so far, lined up on terms of sequencing when they wanted to get in and the rest. We then had the tragic events of the tornadoes on July 19th, and we were directly impacted by that, and I'm going to have Stacy discuss that. It has delayed us a little bit directly with respect to Hancock County and getting them into operation. I'm going to move because I'm hearing it. Am I hearing an echo? I didn't touch anything. So it directly impacted Hancock County, and we're having some discussions now on the overall architecture of where everything's going to go in. We're accelerating one of the host locations and getting that up and running is a priority while we evaluate the impact from the tornado on the Marshalltown host selected area. But we're recovering quickly from that. Everything is proceeding now with full vigor. We have enhanced our internal staffing. So behind myself, there is a large team. Behind Stacy, there's a large team. And behind Chris, there's a large team of people that I hope at some point in time can come out and have the pleasure to meet with the PSAPs and the agencies and to hopefully stand up here and give an update on their behalf as well. I'm going to pass it over to Stacy at this point in time, so
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Paul mentioned the tornado, and I don't know if a lot of you have probably seen the pictures of the Raycom building, and this is what we got from our partners at Raycom. And the amazing thing is that the facility was up and running the whole time. There was no loss of service, and you can see the big hole there at the top is where some of our equipment was housed for the proof of concept. So we had some server equipment that was there at that location, and unfortunately it's no longer usable, not because of anything with the building, but because when the walls were removed, there was a flash of debris and fiberglass insulation that went through and kind of damaged those servers. So the servers are still working, but for safety, they're going to all be replaced. So the equipment for the proof of concept has been shipped out. It should be there at the facility, and we'll get it in place and installed and back up and running. But it did put us a little behind track for the Hancock cutover for that PSAP and the proof of concept. So we're looking at replacing the equipment and then also getting power back to the building, getting the network connectivity back in place. And then we'll be rescheduling to get Hancock back online and get the proof of concept back on track. And then Paul mentioned a little bit about what we're looking at as far as the program after that. We've got 2 host sites that we'll be using, and you can kind of see the timeline that we're looking at here. The host servers will be in place by the end of the month. That's the goal, and we'll be configuring that hardware. Did I hear there was a question? No? We'll be getting the hardware and the software all configured. And once that's done, we have a tentative plan to start rolling out the PSAPs that have already expressed their interest. And these slides are a few days old, so we're not seeing the most recent couple that have expressed their interest. We're going to start a little bit slow with a couple. We have some PSAPs that are already on the Zetron call-taking equipment, so it's a little bit easier of a cutover than the brand new. So we're looking at those might take a little bit longer, but we're estimating about 60 days to get each PSAP up and running on the new call-taking equipment. So we're going to start with a couple, and then we feel like after that, we'll roll out 5 or so at a time. And you can see a tentative schedule here for how that will play out through the middle of next year. And then in addition to just call-taking services, we've got a lot of other services that have been asked for, and Blake talked about that a little bit. We've got folks that are looking to upgrade or get new EMD equipment. They may not have any EMD services right now. So those, for some folks, will be brand new. And then also CAD, logging, mapping, those services will all be rolled out as well for all of these PSAPs. So any questions about the program or the proof of concept or the PSAP rollout? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Just to wrap up, I had one, no, you guys are good. But they mentioned something that I should mention as well with the tornado in Marshalltown. For about 3 weeks, Marshall County didn't receive their own 911 calls because of aerial fiber that was knocked down. So between Windstream and ICN and actually Alliant Energy had to go in and replace the power poles and then repair the fiber. So for 3 weeks, they weren't receiving calls. And I just want to give a big shout out, and I know Marshalltown would echo this, to the DPS PSAPs that were basically receiving those calls for 3 weeks. It was a huge help. And it was, I think, longer than anyone anticipated getting those calls back correctly directed to Marshall County. But, you know, in all reality, that's the benefit of NextGen 911 is you have a backup. Everyone is a backup to other PSAPs. So from that aspect of it, it worked just great. And I know Marshalltown was very appreciative that DPS was able to cover those calls for 3 weeks.
Okay, thank you. All right, Swickmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't mind walking. I had an unplanned doctor visit a couple weeks ago, and apparently they don't see the merits of my weight matching the number associated with an ICS 205. So apparently I could use the exercise, so I don't mind walking. Brief update for the board today. We have 5 new standards up for approval today and 6 new users. Well, I should say 5 new users and, 6 new users today. If you have any questions on the standards that are being published, they do include air ambulance landing zones and prisoner and medical transports. If you have any questions on what's being published to the website with regards to those standards, please let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions on that. On a side note related to those standards, the transport standard is one that originated from our RIC meetings, specifically RIC 1. I know Sheriff Rotter was in on that, as was Mr. Dennert. We are listening to feedback from end users. This is something that was discussed as being a necessary item, so we incorporated it into our allotment of standards. We are listening to feedback, so if you have anything as far as operationally focused standards that you think might be beneficial, please let us know. We'll work on trying to get that taken care of. Speaking of standards, we had our most recent meeting on July 31st. The next one is scheduled for the 21st of August. We also have several training opportunities coming up with regards to the Essex Regional Training, which the Council passed funding for last month, so we appreciate that and thank you for that. That's coming up in September. We have a couple of ICS 300 offerings coming up in October and November. We're working on getting an incident tactical dispatching class set up as well. That'll probably take place in Jones County. We're near finalization of the details on that. The details will be posted as soon as we have them available to it, and we have our scoping call done. I'm looking at trying to streamline the registration process slightly to make it a little bit more automated. So there's changes coming there as well that we're working on. I want to give a shout out to Blake as well for helping out with the 2019 revision to the National Emergency Communications Plan. We had another one of those calls yesterday. They're happening weekly now. And there's been a lot of focus on rural needs, which I think is very good for us. A lot of times it's been focused on the heavily populated metropolitan areas, but they're taking a lot more focus on rural needs this time around, which is nice. Also, a final note, there's a new contract as well for purchasing FirstNet equipment. The NPP Gov contract was just approved. Iowa agencies now have, I think, 3 avenues to purchase FirstNet devices. There's the new contract, there's the federal contract, and then there's a state contract as well. So there should be lots of different pathways to get devices that you would need to access that type of network. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know. I'm happy to forward you on to the right people to answer those questions, especially with contracting stuff, because procurement is something I try to stay out of. So with that, I'll take questions. Okay.
Thank you. Were there any technical advisory comments from the board? Any from out here? No? Okay. All right, next, Office of Emergency Communications, Jim Lundstedt.
Good morning. Just a couple of quick things for you. We will soon be announcing our FY 2019 technical assistance offerings as we analyze the feedback that we got from the states and localities on the SafeCom nationwide surveys. It appears that one of the critical mass areas is understanding the cybersecurity risk to PSAPs as a critical infrastructure. So we're going to offer a series of different technical assistance outreach offerings. These will be phased in. Initially, we'll probably offer a webinar just to give people some food for thought, things that you should be considering. I've read some of the preliminary analysis from the SafeCom nationwide survey, and it is pretty interesting, the amount of awareness or lack thereof that exists across the U.S. It's a very wide swath that this took, but in fact, we know that there are some things we can be doing and we should be promoting. So look for information on that. We'll do outreach through Swick Myers and coordinate with Blake. We are going to be holding a FEMA Regional Emergency Communications Working Group called the RECWIG meeting in Davenport in early September. It's September 5 through 7. Begins at noon on Wednesday the 5th and concludes Friday at noon. There'll be a couple of things of interest. The focus of this RECWIG meeting will be on EMAC and understanding mission-ready packages when it comes to communications assets. We learned from the hurricanes last year that when issuing an EMAC request for an MRP, for example, a mission-ready package, what does a package of communications assets look like? If you get the answer, we have 50 portable radios available with chargers, how detailed is that really? It doesn't tell you much. So we're trying to develop some standards around what is an MRP and do typing. In advance of the RECWIG meeting, OEC will host a webinar on Monday, August 27th at 10 a.m. to talk about what is an MRP, some things that have been learned and some efforts we've made in FEMA Region 4 to begin typing communications assets. Information has been shared with Blake and Chris, and I'll send out another reminder on that before the 27th. Again, 10 a.m. on the 27th, and the RECWIG is in Davenport at Scott Emergency Communications Center on 5 through 7 September. That's all I have today, other than I'm wearing my Smokey Bear patch. I read this morning 80% of federal firefighting assets in the NIFC cache are currently engaged. Things are pretty bad, so let's not burn the nation down, folks. Any questions for me? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, Chapter 34A update. Tracy is not with us today. Kurt is going to take her place.
Okay, Tracy gave me stuff she wanted me to pass on to you about the response from the letter that she sent out on July 30th. She used the Blake's contact list for 911 centers. Said she received a very good response, and the letter asked for participation in the committee charged with working on updating the Iowa Code, Chapter 34A. She said next week she's going to be emailing out a doodle poll inquiring about the availability to attend the next committee meeting. And if you did not receive a letter or would like to participate, she urges you to either give Tracy a call or send her an email, and she'll get a copy of the letter to you and get your name on the list. She said you don't have to attend every meeting, but the conference will be available online, and she'd like to, so you don't have to attend everyone, but she'd like to get as many people involved in the committee changes as possible.
Okay, any questions? Thank you for the update. Okay, unfinished business. Last time we put aside the $18,000 request from DPS. Blake send out that updated information. Blake, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Just, I had a conversation with Robbie today. Looking at changing the location, so it's a free facility, it would be at Hawkeye Community College, but I don't believe anything else changed. And then if there are any questions, Robbie's here to answer them.
Please go ahead if you have information.
Initially, we thought we were going to have the training at Kirkwood College in Cedar Rapids, but Hawkeye Community College in Waterloo has offered a free classroom for this event and this training. So very fortunate. Kirkwood would have cost. So that is, we've reserved a room pending the board's approval. And any questions you have about the training? I know that there was a clerical issue. The administrative assistant at Professional Dispatch Management recently had 2 deaths in her family and has been dealing with some family personal issues, and there has been another person, I believe, doing the paperwork, so there was that error. The total cost is $18,000. I have sent the recent quote to Blake. I believe you all have it, so the total cost is $18,000.
Okay. Any questions from anyone? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then I would entertain a motion to approve the DPS request for $18,000. All right, I have a motion, and do I have a second? Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Against? Aye. Okay. We have 1 against George. Okay, motion carries. All right, I don't believe I have any new business unless somebody else has something. No travel request either. Do we have any business from the floor? Any business on the phone? Anything from the board? Okay. All right, well, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, I've moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. And we are adjourned. Thank you.
Jeff Anderson.